Defining conservatism is undoubtedly a challenge. Defining progressivism, which typically involves pretending not to be a socialist, or defining socialism, which typically involves pretending not to be a communist, is a far easier task. But I will do my best. Now, my understanding of conservative values and my belief in the truth and power of conservative ideas is inextricably bound to my family history. 55 years ago, on a cold February morning in 1968, an Asian man, not yet 21, stepped off a plane at Heathrow Airport. There was no family to meet him. There were no friends. He had nothing to his name. When Kenya, the country of his birth, effectively forced out Asians after independence, its government robbed my father of his future. But in his head, he had something that nobody could take away from him. A dream of reaching safety, of building a home, of raising a family, of finding work, and of making a better life for himself. He also had in his heart an unshakable belief that if he got to the United Kingdom in this country, and only in this country, that he could fulfill that dream. Although he was practically penniless, he held in his hand something of infinite value: his British passport. A few sheets of paper that guaranteed him security, freedom, equality before the law, and opportunity. Not long after my father arrived at Heathrow, an Asian woman just turned 18 stepped off a plane at Aberdeen Airport. Her circumstances were very different. She wasn't fleeing political turmoil like my father. She was simply looking for a better life than the circumstances of her birth afforded. She was born in Port Louis in Mauritius in 1945, the third of 5 siblings, 2 of whom died as infants due to lack of medical care. She had similar dreams and aspirations to my father, and the same belief that of all the countries in the world, the UK was uniquely capable of enabling her to fulfill those dreams. Her aunt and uncles served in the British Army in Egypt during World War II. They were the heroes of her family growing up. She told me recently how, as a young girl, she remembers the family gathered around her father's Pi radio at home in Port Louis, the sound crackling with static as they strained to listen to the coronation of the Queen on the BBC World Service. And how preposterous it would have seemed to anyone gathered around that radio in that little home that some decades later, one of their own should have the responsibility and the honour of overseeing the public safety arrangements for the Queen's funeral, for the King's coronation, as Home Secretary for the United Kingdom. Traditional expectations for girls at that time meant my mother's education was never the priority. It was expected that she'd have an arranged marriage at 18, like her mother, but she had different aspirations, and she made other plans. She saw a recruitment advert posted by the NHS in the local paper. She applied in secret and was successful. Her father was furious, but with her mother's help, she left Mauritius, and she was posted to Aberdeen for training and lodged with a Scottish family who became her family here in the UK. Nan and Sandy became my granny and granddad in Scotland, and I have fond childhood memories of us visiting them for Christmas and Hogmanay in Aberdeen. Now, neither my parents were born into wealth or privilege, but they did have 3 things going for them. Firstly, Their parents instilled in each of them certain values: hard work, gratitude, love of family, faith, reverence for tradition, and the importance of education. Secondly, each of them, children of the Commonwealth, born in the aftermath of World War II, grew up acutely aware of what this country, its empire, and its people sacrificed to secure freedom and defeat the evil of Nazism. They loved and believed in the United Kingdom as a force for good and saw it as a paragon of democracy, equality, and opportunity. And thirdly, each of them had the good sense to try and the great fortune to succeed in coming to build a life here. Perhaps it's easy for outsiders, but coming from where they came from, they never took this country for granted. They never talked it down and wouldn't trust anybody that did. Even in those moments when life let them down, their hearts swelled with pride to be British. My mother worked as an NHS nurse for 45 years. My father lived by his wits and did various jobs. He started work on the shop floor of a paint factory and worked his way to an office job as an insurance salesman. My parents' lives were hard graft. Money was often a problem. I watched my dad lose his job during the recession in the early 1990s. He was unemployed for 5 years. It was crippling for our family financially. Mum took on extra shifts so that we could get by. And as a child, I saw what this did to my dad's sense of self, his sense of pride and confidence. I understood from this at an early age the importance of self-sufficiency, the connection between work and dignity, the extraordinary importance of family who saw us through the hardest times, and the importance of welfare and a safety net in situations of extremis. Very few people truly want to be dependent on the state. And unlike the left, we Conservatives do not seek to make people dependent on it. Eventually, my father found employment and finished his career working for a local housing association. Now, my parents were never wealthy, but in fulfilling their dreams of making a better life for themselves and building a family here, they were immensely successful. That their daughter would have the privilege to be elected to the UK Parliament, serve the people of Fareham, and then serve the British people as Attorney General and then Home Secretary is so far outside the realm of anything that my parents could reasonably have imagined when they landed in the United Kingdom. And isn't it extraordinary? It's an extraordinary thing that we live in a country where that is not extraordinary. My parents' story is both incredible and ordinary at the same time. Conservative cabinets in recent years have been full of similar stories. Our Prime Minister has a not dissimilar story himself. And this story is not just an immigrant story. My parents' dreams and aspirations were not the preserve of people with brown skin. They are the basic aspirations of decent, hard-working, family-oriented people up and down this country. The desire to find stable work, to afford their own home, to have pride in place, to be part of a safe and thriving community, to raise a family, to see their children well educated and enjoying the sorts of opportunities that were beyond their grasp. Conservatism makes possible and celebrates the fulfillment of these aspirations. My parents came to this country because it embodied distinct values and ideals and presented unique opportunities. And it turns out that those were conservative values and ideals. And from my parents' potted history, a few key themes emerge in how I understand conservatism. Firstly, the conservative mentality. Ours, like my parents', is a politics of optimism, of pride, national unity, aspiration, and realism. The left's is a politics of pessimism, guilt, national division, resentment, and utopianism. I understand the goal of conservatism is to protect fundamental rights, enhance the dignity and potential of human beings, and in doing so, forge healthy communities that make possible extraordinary collective achievements. The left, on the other hand, sees the purpose of politics as to eradicate the existence of inequality, even if that comes at the expense of individual liberty and human flourishing. One thing we do not wish to conserve is someone's life circumstances. We want them to grow more prosperous, see their horizons and hopes expand, and become more fulfilled and happier. We see it as the most natural thing in the world for parents to want their children to have chances and enjoy the things that they could not. There is no snobbery among authentic conservatives, and there is no inverted snobbery either. Jealousy is an ugly emotion. We deeply admire self-made people because it doesn't matter where you start, you can make a better life for yourself. But it is astonishing to the extent to which this idea is now contested by the left. We want to expand opportunity, passionately so, but the idea that any true equality of opportunity is structurally impossible, and so instead the state must intervene to ensure equality of outcomes, is a dangerous one. One cannot legislate away differences in work ethic nor natural endowments. Instead, conservatives look to level the playing field so that more people have a fair opportunity to improve their lot. Secondly, common sense abhors political correctness and radical ideology, and conservatism is a common sense philosophy. Conservatives prize experience, judgment, and wisdom. I think of William F. Buckley Jr.'s quip that I would rather be governed by the first 2,000 people in the telephone directory than by the Harvard University faculty. And that captures the essence of it. We are skeptical of self-appointed gurus, experts, and elites who know what is best in the public's interest, even when that public is quite certain that they need something different from what those experts are proposing. Those prognosticators of doom who said that Brexit would be an economic catastrophe for the UK, not only were they wrong, they demonstrated a profound ignorance of the British people when they attributed their legitimate desire to regain our national sovereignty as some mix of stupidity and xenophobia. Common sense and a shared understanding of who we are and what really matters in life have vastly more to recommend themselves than does anything that emanates from an ivory tower. No offence to those who work in ivory towers. There are a few of you here, I think. Measuring diversity only on the basis of skin, colour, sex, and sexuality is mind-bogglingly myopic. Identity politics is the politics of grievance and division. It is illiberal and incompatible with social cohesion. It defines people based on their external characteristics rather than on the content of their character or their natural abilities. It then divides people into groups and places those groups on a hierarchy of grievance, explaining any disparity of outcome through the prism of structural discrimination. Identity politics has no end. Its goal is the infinite division of society and the perpetual pitting of groups against one another. In that sense, its fundamental aim is not equality, but political power. The Conservatives' view on equality is one that recognises it is impossible to eradicate differences between people, but strives for a society where those differences don't determine the chances that you get in life. A Conservative has no truck with political correctness. Our belief in freedom of speech means not only must we remain free to say what we think, but that we must never be forced to say things that we know to be false. And there is something peculiar about our current political moment, where those of us advancing unfashionable facts are beaten over the head with fashionable fictions. The ethnicity of grooming gangs and the perpetrators in those gangs is the sort of fact that has become unfashionable in some quarters, much like the fact that 100% of women do not have a penis. And it is absurd that we find ourselves in a situation where this is a remotely controversial statement. Conservatism must never be dogmatic. Our conclusions must always be open to reconsideration in the light of new evidence. In that way, we distinguish ourselves from the totalitarian tendency on the left. And Conservatives must always be honest with the public, honest about our principles and honest about our priorities. In that way, we distinguish ourselves from the leader of the left, Sir Keir Starmer. He opposes today the things he stood for yesterday, that he'll change his mind on tomorrow, and he'll campaign on next year as a man of great principle. Although given his definition of a woman, we can't rule him out from running to be Labour's first female Prime Minister. Thirdly, Conservatives believe in and love their country. You can see from my family story that Conservatives love their country in a way which is unaffected, unself-conscious, and wholly unapologetic. Venerating the past, cherishing established institutions, and preserving traditions and the countryside are all immensely important. That is not the same thing as believing that our best days are behind us. Conservatives believe that human ingenuity and liberal doses of elbow grease can take us to new heights. And of course, many on the left love their country too. But a love of country is a necessary, probably the necessary condition of being a Conservative. To love one's country, one must first believe in it. The truth is that large parts of the contemporary left are ashamed of our history and embarrassed by the sentiments and desires expressed by the British public. Whereas Conservatives know that this country has no future without a reverence for its past. I'm not embarrassed to say that I love Britain, or that I trust the judgment of the British people. I suspect Keir Starmer doesn't, which is why he's secretly drawing up plans to enfranchise millions of Europeans instead. But I think there is something deeper going on here. I think the left can only sell its vision for the future by making people feel terrible about our past. White people do not exist in a special state of sin or collective guilt. Nobody should be blamed for things that happened before they were born. The defining feature of this country's relationship with slavery is not that we practiced it, but that we led the way in abolishing it. We should be proud of who we are, but look at what the radical left is preoccupied with. Decolonising the curriculum, demanding reparations, denigrating our heroes, tearing down statues. These all aim at undermining decent people's belief in the goodness of their country. And when the silent majority is compelled to raise its voice in objection, we're attacked as the extremists. We're the ones accused of fighting a culture war. The term culture war has become one of the most meaningless phrases in contemporary political discourse. It's become an epithet to hurl at a political opponent you disagree with, to discredit rather than engage with the substance of their argument. Those of us who want secure borders, those of us like Miriam Cates, who you've also wisely invited to speak, who speak out against a sort of radical gender ideology which is leading to the mutilation and abuse of our children, or those of us simply standing up for fundamental liberal and British values like freedom of speech, are all apparently engaged in a culture war. There is a perverse irony in these accusations, too. The people who make them accuse us of adopting these positions because they are popular. Has it never occurred to them that we might be for these things even if they weren't popular? That we might be for them because we believe them to be true? That's known as principle. And speaking of principles, my fourth observation is that Conservatives understand that borders, national identity, and public order are fundamental to a healthy nation. I think my views on illegal migration are well known. Some of you might have noticed our Stop the Boats bill that is currently before the House of Lords. And while illegal migration is rightly our priority, given the acute challenges that we face in the Channel, we must not lose sight of the importance of controlling legal migration as well. I voted and campaigned for Brexit. Indeed, I'm a proud Spartan because I wanted Britain to control migration so that we all have a say on what works for our country. High-skilled workers support economic growth. And where the labour market has acute or structural shortages, as with the NHS, it is of course right that we should have an immigration system agile enough to plug those shortages. But we need to get overall immigration numbers down. And we mustn't forget how to do things for ourselves. There is no good reason why we can't train up enough truck drivers, butchers, fruit pickers, builders, or welders. Brexit enables us to build a high-skilled, high-wage economy that is less dependent on low-skilled foreign labour. That was our 2019 manifesto pledge, and it's what we must deliver. And it's not xenophobic to say that mass and rapid migration is unsustainable in terms of housing supply, public services, or community relations. Nor is it bigoted to say that we have too many asylum seekers in this country for whom we have insufficient accommodation. That absorbing more and more people means building more and more homes is another one of those unfashionable facts that the Open Borders Brigade would say means we're starting a culture war. It's not racist for anyone, ethnic minority or otherwise, to want to control our borders. And I reject the left's argument that it's hypocritical for someone from an ethnic minority like mine to know these facts or to speak these truths. People who come here should embrace and respect this country. They must not commit crimes. They may practice any faith or none, and they need to respect everyone else's right to do the same. They need to learn English and understand British social norms and mores, which is not to say that they cannot enrich and add to our culture. Above all, they cannot simply turn up and say, "I live here now, you have to look after me." My parents came here through legal and controlled migration. They spoke the language, they threw themselves into the community, they embraced British values. When they arrived, they signed up to be part of our shared project because the UK meant something distinct. Integration was part of the quid pro quo. That didn't mean eradicating their own heritage, but it did mean adopting British identity. As Douglas Murray, another one of your distinguished guests, has eloquently said, the British identity isn't simply interchangeable with liberal values. Britishness is so much more than that, some of it unquantifiable, but all of it to be celebrated and cherished. The unexamined drive towards multiculturalism as an end in itself, combined with identity politics, is a recipe for communal disaster. We cannot have immigration without integration. And if we lack the confidence to promote our culture, to defend our values and venerate our past, then we have nothing to integrate people into. We have a nation, but more than that, we have a national character to conserve. We are not unique in wanting to conserve it. Other leaders in countries like Italy, Denmark, Poland, Greece, and Austria are increasingly seeing things the same way. Conservatism is order, or it is nothing. That means orderly streets as well as orderly borders. And the purpose of order is to defend what is good and what is right. Now, people aren't perfect. Some of them are not good. Conservatives will always be the party of law and order. And I make no apologies for the public order legislation that I've introduced even in the last month. The coronation took place round the corner from where we are today. The nation and millions of people around the world valued and respected what it saw in Westminster Abbey. And I was determined that they should be able to do so. The people's right to freely enjoy that day trumped any claim of reckless, selfish people that they should be free to disrupt whatever they want without effective consequence. Fifth, conservatism is at its core pro-family. Where families fail, others must pick up the pieces. We must never give up on the institution of the family. Far from being obsolete or unnecessary, it remains the most powerful force for human improvement. Likewise, friendship, local community, religious communities are all extraordinarily important. Almost all of us have people in our lives about whom we care much more than we care about ourselves. The decisions we make in our lives, where to live, where to work, how to organize our financial affairs, how to vote, with whom we should associate, are typically driven by the effect we think all of this will have on our loved ones. We understand that everything starts with the family, that families can do harm, but more often do enormous and irreplaceable good, and that government must do all it can to support families and nothing to undermine them. And before I conclude, It's worth touching upon what we Conservatives are not and what we must never become. The British Conservative Party is the most successful political party in history because of its elasticity. We are a genuinely broad tent, capable of robust internal debate and critical self-reflection. We seek to adapt our principles to ensure our politics is sensitive to and reflective of public sentiment. By contrast, the left looks to disguise its ideology or simply impose it on the public by browbeating and castigating in moral terms anyone who disagrees. Debates about Brexit and immigration policy are obvious examples of that. The Conservative movement has been at its most successful when it has been united against evils like communism. National conservatism, as a nascent and distinct political philosophy, has a role to play in the Conservative movement. I suspect the form it takes in the UK will naturally differ in some ways to the form it's taken in the US. But having observed events in the US in recent years, I do want to sound a note of caution. One way that we Conservatives must distinguish ourselves from the left is by not devouring ourselves through fratricide. Free market conservatism is not the enemy of national conservatism. Conservatism must never abandon markets, the rule of law, or a belief in the power of capitalism to lift people out of poverty. At the same time, conservatism should never abandon people or communities to market forces. And to the extent that those two forces are in tension, it is incumbent on Conservatives to find a prudent balance, not pick a side and start shooting. Similarly, conservatism can never mean isolationism. Freeing ourselves from a blinkered sense that the UK's destiny is as a predominantly European-facing country rather than a truly global one with ties to the Commonwealth, America and elsewhere, has been one of the best political developments in recent decades. And given the extent to which European growth has stagnated in the 15 years since the great financial crisis, I suspect our newly acquired ability to go for growth outside of the EU will prove to be one of the best economic developments too. The UK, and America for that matter, must remain deeply engaged in the world if we wish to see our children living prosperous and free. We must do so through international development and foreign aid, soft power diplomacy, and the hard power of our military. The idea that Conservatives have no stake in the outcome of Russia's barbaric invasion of the Ukraine and that our country should offer no support remains a fringe view in this country, and rightly so. The truth is, conservatism is not a particular ideology or program. It does not possess, thank goodness, the utopian nature of most other isms. It is, I think, ultimately best understood as an outlook. Michael Oakeshott wrote of the conservative disposition, while Irvin Kristol called it a persuasion. Whatever it is precisely, I'm certain that it's the natural persuasion of the English-speaking peoples. And I also suspect it's a universal disposition of humanity. We Conservatives come in all shapes, stripes, sizes, and yes, as much as it enrages the left, all colours. We are all full of belief in humanity, in our country, in our way of life. Our pragmatism is not cynicism, and there is nothing unrealistic in our romanticism. I know, in my heart and in my head, that the facts of life are ultimately conservative. And that, above all else, is why I and all conservatives should be optimistic about the future of conservatism, the future of our great nation, and dare I say, of Western civilization. Thank you.